Hello, my brothers, and welcome to this retreat this year, which we are doing in a very strange way. My name is Joe Boenzi. I'm a Salesian of the San Francisco province in California, and I'm director of Don Bosco Hall and the Institute of Salesian Studies in Berkeley, California. Over a year ago, I was asked to come to your province and give the retreats this year, and I said yes, and then COVID-19 happened, and this made it impossible to come any earlier or even come now. And so we're doing this retreat in this kind of recorded way, which is a difficulty for you because you have to sit through this boring thing. And it's a little bit of a difficult to me because usually when I preach, when I speak, I need to see people and get reactions from people. And I read people's faces as I go ahead. So now I'm just looking into space. I'm looking at a lens, and I'm thanking my brother Alvu, who is recording this for you. So here we are. So the retreat. This year is the 100th anniversary of the death of Father Paolo Albera, Don Paolo Albera, who is the second successor of Don Bosco. He died on October 29th, 1921. So we have a few months before that actual anniversary. But in many places in the congregation, we had thought that this year there'd be celebration. There was supposed to be several publications, and in fact some have been publishing. And we've been preparing it actually for almost a decade to celebrate the figure of Paolo Albera, which is really the figure of those first Salesians. So we're going to talk about Paolo Albera, but we're going to really look at how Don Albera teaches about Don Bosco. He is really the first Salesian who had to grapple with the idea of how do you speak to the new generations about the founder, St. John Bosco, Don Bosco, with whom he grew up. He knew Don Bosco since he was 12 years old. And so with that experience of growing up at the oratory, of becoming a Salesian within the first year of the founding, of being one of the first young Salesians ordained and one of the first directors and rectors, he knew the founder and he was formed by the founder. And if he ever had a doubt, he could go see the founder and ask, how do we do this? So his affection for Don Bosco as his own educator and father is very personal. But it was after the death of Don Bosco. Don Bosco, of course, died in 1888, and it was 5 years later that Don Albera was then on the General Council, and on the General Council as the Catechist General, that is, he was also called the Spiritual Director General. And just to put it in our perspective, the Catechist General would become the Formation Counselor on the General Council. And it was Don Rua who said to him, you need to look to the formation of the new members. And so this becomes his responsibility, which he is very happy to do. He's happy to do because he had come to the General Council as someone who had already been working in formation, as a founder of houses, as a sustainer of novitiates, as a provincial in France, the first provincial in France. And so he comes with this idea of formation. And Don Rua says, you have to look to the formation of our young Salesians. And so he's looking at the formation of Salesian religious, but he's also looking at the formation of new priests who are Salesians. He will also look for the formation of new rectors and old rectors who might be forgetting how to do things. He would also look to the formation of new provincials, having been a rector and a provincial, and now as new provincials are coming on board, how are they formed in the Salesian spirit? So this was very important to Don Rua, who charges this to Don Albera. So Paolo Albera takes this to heart and he does this. He's on the General Council for 18 years as the Catechist General. And then finally, after the death of Don Rua, he was elected, to his surprise, the Rector Major. So he is the second successor of Don Bosco, the third Rector Major, Don Bosco being the first, the second successor. And to carry on this idea of Salesianizing the Salesians, of bringing them to understand who Don Bosco was and who Don Bosco is, so that they can be true sons of such a great father. I'm quoting him there. We need to be good sons of such a good father. So, who was that father, Don Bosco? The whole teaching of Paolo Albera will be reflecting what he learned from Don Bosco. Now, I'm saying that, and just to say that during this retreat we want to look at Albera's contributions, but essentially through Albera we want to look at Don Bosco. I want to bring this out also in the beginning and say that today we have many books and we have great teachers, and in our own institute here we had the great Arthur Lenti, who taught for 25 years before he began to publish, and then his works have been translated as he looked at the life and spirit of Don Bosco in 7 long volumes. These have been translated into many languages, and perhaps you yourselves have seen Father Lenti's books. We have the writings of Pietro Stella, great historian, who talked about the religiosity of the times and how Don Bosco reflected the times and the religious spirit of his times in new ways. We had the great Pietro Braido, who was an educator and talked about Don Bosco in education. And then in all of our provinces, we've had people who've studied Don Bosco, who wrote about Don Bosco, who taught about Don Bosco, and we've all grown up from their, not just their conferences, but their writings. Our Salesian bulletins have reflected on the figure of Don Bosco, the teaching of Don Bosco, the apostolate of Don Bosco, the ministry of Don Bosco. And so we go back to those writings that take us back to the sources. Also, we have had, since 1984, the publication of many of Don Bosco's letters. Now we have many volumes of the complete letters of St. John Bosco, and we're able to go into them and see who did he write to, why did he write, what are these formative texts. And we've also, through the Eledici, through the Say, through the Generalit, republished many of the writings. In fact, all of the writings of Don Bosco have been made for us. They were first published, and now you can find them all online. You can find PDFs of all of his writings, and many of these have been then translated. In 1988, all this work was flourishing. For 2015, the 200th anniversary of his birth, a volume was published for the general chapter of 2014, a big green volume that then had all the writings, although not all of them, the principal writings of Don Bosco as spiritual guide, as educator, as historian, although Don Bosco is not a historian, but Don Bosco reflecting on his times in the history. And these were all made available through the work and the scholarship of Aldo Giraudo, of Francesco Moto, of other works that were done, Preyeso, Braido, all put together for that general chapter. And those are all brought back to our provinces. Those then were translated and published also. So we have these. And so we go back to the writings of Don Bosco, and this is not only a great convenience, but it's a great duty to study Don Bosco. Paul Albera, there was nothing written. We had no writings of Don Bosco except the Letture Cattoliche, the Catholic readings, that little magazine that he would issue every month, Don Bosco. And many of those copies were lost, nobody had them. But to form, he couldn't say to the young Salesians, well, make sure you read all these things. What could they read? They could read the constitutions, but what else was there? There was nothing. So what was the mission of Don Albera, to bring the memory of Don Bosco, as he had met Don Bosco, and he had grown up with Don Bosco, as he had reflected on those experiences, as he, as a rector, had lived the leadership of Don Bosco, and now to bring them to others. So when Don Rua says to him, take care of formation, he realizes a way to do this will be by giving spiritual retreats. So here we are in the year of Paolo Albera doing a retreat. I don't know if it's spiritual. It's sort of a zooming in. It's sort of a recorded, it's sort of a streaming retreat. But we hope that we can do this as a spiritual retreat, is to understand really who is Don Bosco. And we're going to try to look at it through the idea of Don Albera. Now, if I was in front of you, I'd look around and say any ideas or questions, but I can't do that. So I'm going to take a breath and then say this. What did Don Bosco write? The constitutions. And it'll be Don Albera who will take the constitutions and put them in a good edition. He will take all of the little regulations that Don Bosco wrote for all the different houses and put them together. He will take the regulations, the findings of all the general chapters that were all in different documents, and he will put them together, and those will become the regulations of the Salesian Society. So today we have the constitutions and regulations. Albera was the one who put together the first book of constitutions and regulations, because regulations were not in a book. He put them together with the constitutions, and that was while he was catechist general. You often see pictures of Don Rua with the constitutions in his hand, a big thick book of constitutions, and really those were the ones prepared by Paolo Albera, because they were the constitutions and regulations. And those were made available. So important to understand. He's the one who put system to what we had. The general chapters were almost lost documents. He went back and found all the documents and the minutes, and he put them all together. So we have to thank him for doing that, Catechist General Don Albera. That then would allow us to go to the sources, at least the first years, the constitutions that Don Bosco wrote and the regulations, some of which written by Don Bosco and some written by the chapters that Don Bosco presided over. And so he gave us that source. But there's a few other things. So then when he was rector major, I'm just going to do a show and tell. That's what Americans do in school. Our school children, you know, after a month in school, our little children are asked, bring something in from your house and show it to everybody. So they all come in and they have it in their little book bags, and they lift up something and they say, oh, this is from our house, and this is what we have. And we have St. John Bosco statue, and we like St. John Bosco. And this is what little children do. And everybody in the class asks them, oh, who's St. John Bosco? Oh, who's your grandmother? What are you showing? Show and tell. So I'm going to do a show and tell. I'm going to show you a few things. And the first thing to say is this. When he was for 18 years giving retreats, he took those all down in notes. I actually read through every one of those retreats when I was working on my doctorate. And I realized that some of those he had in copybooks that he would put on the desk and open up and speak from. And others he had in a little book that was only this big, a little copybook that he would put in his pocket here, inside his cassock. And then with this, he would pull it out and then he would give his little talks, short conferences, especially when he was doing days of recollections or the exercise of a happy death. So he would write all those down. He has a lot of notes. There are 26 boxes of notes and of findings and of memories of Don Albera in the archives. And of those, there are several that are just his notes for the retreats. When he became rector major, he's not giving the retreats. He's not going around and giving the retreats anymore, but he stops and he thinks, okay, how can I make the Salesians benefit from all of that experience, because really they need it. So he begins to do the circular letters. Now, Don Bosco wrote circular letters. Don Rua wrote circular letters. Usually their circular letters were administrative. How do you run a house? What's a director to do with new converts? What about smoking? Is it allowed? There's all these kinds of circular letters that Don Bosco would write, or someone on his council would write for him, and these were sent to all the provincials, who then sent them to all the rectors. Now, there weren't a lot of provinces then. There were 4 provinces to begin with. But these were sent out maybe every 3 months, maybe every month if something was urgent, but they were all normally administrative. Once a year, Don Bosco would write what he called an edifying letter. So this would be a letter on a spiritual theme, not an administrative theme, a spiritual theme. So once a year, an edifying letter. Don Rua, who copied everything that Don Bosco did and followed in his footsteps, was an admirable reflection of Don Bosco, because of course he was with Don Bosco from the time of 8 and was at the oratory and was in the first group of Salesians. His name is at the head of the list of the first Salesians. And so as rector major, he did what Don Bosco did, and so the administrative circular letters came out every month, every 2 months, and once a year, an edifying letter. You know very well his circular edifying letter on poverty or on devotion to the Sacred Heart. So those are the famous ones from Don Rua, issued by Don Rua. Otherwise, his letters were administrative. Now, I have to tell you a secret. Both those edifying letters of Don Rua were actually written by Paolo Albera. He wrote the letter on poverty. And he wrote the letter on devotion to the Sacred Heart when, for 1900, so when we moved to the year 1900, 1901, the whole Salesian society, all the Daughters of Mary Help Christians, all the cooperators were dedicated to the Sacred Heart. And so there's a special letter on devotion to the Sacred Heart. And Don Rua sends this out as his circular letter. It has his signature on it. It was actually written by Don Albera. Where's the documentation for that? Well, I hope there's some now, but I'll tell you, as I read through all those, I recognized that was not written in Don Rua's handwriting. It's in Albera's handwriting. And many of the words in that letter came from Don Albera's retreats. Remember, I told you I read all his retreats. I'm reading this circular letter by Don Rua, and I say, oh, this is Albera. And it was. And at the end, Rua changed a few words and signed it, and then it was printed, and it went out. So the circular letter came from the rector major, but who wrote it? The one who wrote it was Paolo Albera. So there it is already. He was the ghost writer, we say, for Michael Rua. You know what a ghost writer is. You have an author who had someone famous who pushed a book out there, but who really wrote it? Somebody else wrote it who's not famous. That's the ghost writer. So Albera was the ghost writer for Don Rua on these circular letters, these edifying letters. When in 1910 he becomes rector major, then he begins to issue the circular letters. Now, just to say it, he was very concerned that these letters got to everybody. So at first they were like this. Here's my show and tell. They were written in little booklets like this. And so we have here lettera circolare on religion, the circular letter on religious discipline by Don Albera. And so this was given out, was very small. Why did he want it this small? So that a Salesian could put it in his pocket and carry it, because Salesians were busy. Oh, you had to take care of kids. You were running an oratory. You were running the missions. You were running a school. You were running a workshop. So this was for every Salesian, for the brothers, for the clerics, for the priests, for the rectors. Everybody had it. And they could keep it in their pocket till they finished reading it. This was his idea. You had the circular letter made available to everybody so that his teaching would be in here. So what are these? These often are like his retreats. So now his retreats were in writing as a circular letters. And so here we have the circular letters. Circular letter on the spirit of piety. The circular letter on obedience. Circular letter on religious discipline. He also wrote a circular letter on chastity. He didn't write a circular letter on poverty because he already wrote it and was published by Don Rua. So he doesn't write it again. But then, once a year, he would do an edifying letter. So here's the edifying letter on what? On the oratories and on prayer in the oratories. So here it is. So here is his writing. So he begins to write these. 1910, he becomes rector major. He begins to write them in 1911. There would be a delay, and we'll see all that. But today, I'm not going to go into the letters yet. I want to talk about something else to say. At the last years, the last couple of years, so after World War I, as we were, the idea was in 1915 to celebrate the centenary of the birth of Don Bosco, but they could not do it because of the war of World War I. So it's not until after World War I, 1918, 1919, that they put up the monument to Don Bosco. The past pupils put it up in front of Our Lady Help of Christians Church in Turin. And with that, Don Albera begins to prepare the Salesians for a few things. So looking at Don Bosco as our model, looking at Don Bosco as the founder, and in those he also begins to issue not just his letters, but to get the letters of other members of the General Council. They were supposed to have a general chapter, and they could not have the general chapter because of the war. So he gets them, his General Council, together and writes something. So the Economer General talk about what you need to talk about to the houses. The Prefect General, who was the Vicar General, the Catechist General on formation. So whatever they were doing with their departments, with their dicasteries to put together, and Albera begins what we call today the Acts of the General Council. So then they were called the Acts of the Superior Chapter, because our General Council was called Superior Chapter. So the Acts of the Superior Chapter, he begins to have that issued. So it comes out as a magazine to all the houses every month. So instead of just the circular letter, the small thing, but here it comes, the Rector Major's letter with the instructions from other members of the councils, Acts of the General Council. So he's the one who initiates that. After his death, Don Rinaldi has all of Don Albera's letters collected into a volume, which would be the spiritual, or the lettere circolare, the circular letters of Don Albera. So these would be published as one unit after his death. So here these come out, published by his successor, Filippo Rinaldi, Blessed Philip Rinaldi. So this would come out then. Later, and maybe some of you have seen this, in 1965, at the general headquarters in Turin still, the letters of Don Rua and the letters of Don Albera were then issued again. So in 1965, these were all issued. In Italian, not translated, but here they were, all there. What's interesting is that the Acts of the General Council, Albera wanted those translated. And so in the Acts, you start to have an English edition, a French edition, a Spanish edition start to come out. There's one other book that's important, and this is in 1915. He wanted to have this book for the centenary of the birth of Don Bosco, and it's called The Manual of the Director. Now, one just came out in the past year, and we're all receiving it and all being urged to read it, not just the rectors, but all of the confreres to read it, so you know what to tell the rector. My house, luckily, nobody reads, so nobody's telling me what to do yet. But anyhow, hopefully they'll read it, and we're going to work on that. But the first one was done by Don Rua. Don Albera, rather, 1915, for the centenary of Don Bosco's birth. So this came out, again, you notice the format. It's pocket size, so a director can keep this with him. It was smaller than the breviary, so that this is really a handbook, so that the director knows what to do. In it are motivating chapters, and also there are some step-by-step directions in it. So the manual of the director, here they are. Here they are. So just so you see that and understand it, here we are. So I just wanted to put this in front of you so that you have an idea. And as you have the idea, we'll say, why did he write these things? Because he realized that the young Salesians did not know Don Bosco. So now he's making it available. And really, all the Salesians were young. By 1895, he realized the majority of Salesians had never met Don Bosco. That's only, 7 years after the death of Don Bosco. They didn't know Don Bosco. They were too young. And so they only heard about Don Bosco. And so his motivation in the retreats, and then as Rector Major, his motivation in the circular letters, when he realizes now, 18 years later, most of the rectors did not know Don Bosco. So to bring the spirit of Don Bosco from his experience. Now, this is what he produced. This is what he brought together. And we'll want to look at this during our retreat. I will say this, that there's one more book that he published. This is before he became Rector Major, when he was on the General Council. And this was a bestseller in Italy. And it was a life of a missionary. And the missionary was Luigi Lasagna, the first Salesian provincial in Brazil, and the first Salesian bishop in Brazil, who was murdered by the Masons, although they could never prove it, but they conveniently arranged a train wreck in which the Salesians and Salesian sisters were on board to go to a new mission. And Bishop Lasagna and a couple of Salesians, a couple of sisters were killed in that train wreck. We know that it was staged because conveniently the conductor and the engineer on the train got out of the train and put it full throttle to go forward, and it ran into another train that was also running full throttle with no engineers. So they were murdered. With the shock of that murder, because Bishop Lasagna had been Albera's own pupil, he had been his assistant when he was a cleric. Lasagna had been at Mirabello as a young boy, and he had nurtured that vocation and helped him to discover his vocation as a Salesian and as a missionary. With the shock of that, he wrote the life of Bishop Lasagna, and that was published in 1895, bestseller. And with that, you can say among the Salesians, people who had never met the Catechist General read the book and they go, oh, yes, his talking about the oratory and the experience of Lasagna growing up with Don Bosco was a true inspiration, and so they looked to him. So we'll talk about how the storytelling of Albera, the conferences of Albera, the writings of Albera bring Don Bosco alive to a generation that did not know Don Bosco anymore. All right, 100 years. 100 years have passed. Nobody knows Don Albera anymore. Who reads his circular letters anymore? And this is why the Rector Major, Don Fernandez, has wanted us to celebrate in a special way, get to know the teaching of Don Albera, the experience of Don Albera, the contribution of Don Albera, so that we today can see, how do we look at Don Bosco today? We who never met Don Bosco personally, what are we picking up so that we can be new Don Boscos among the young people among whom we work, among the young Salesians among whom we work, among the laity, among the non-Christians among whom we work? How do we present ourselves? We don't have to talk about Don Bosco, but how do we live our life so that they can meet in us that spirit of Don Bosco, that spirit of St. Francis de Sales, and importantly, the spirit of Jesus the Good Shepherd. Hopefully I'll be able to bring this to you during these days. Thank you for being attentive. Sorry for the poor format of all of this, but I wish you a wonderful experience, and I wish you time to reflect together also on the contribution of those who schooled us, those who taught us, those who formed us, those who told us who Jesus is, so that we could become good Christians and honest citizens. May God bless you all. Thank you so much.